there's been a lot of news, a lot of stuff going on. We had the redacted FBI affidavit that was released on Friday showing that President Trump is more than likely going to be charged with a lot more crimes than we initially thought. Last week, we talked a lot about the Espionage Act. We were talking about 18 USC 793 subsections E and F, where we talked about the fact that you don't need to have classified documents in order to be charged under that act. But looking at just the preamble, the parts of the affidavit that have been released and not redacted, it also looks like there's a case for obstruction of justice in there, in that the FBI agents gave every opportunity to Trump to turn over the stuff that he stole. He even had his lawyers sign documents saying that they turned over everything. What Trump did not know was that they had a confidential informant inside of Mar-a-Lago, and it sounds like multiple confidential informants inside of Mar-a-Lago, confidential informants that were so close to the president that indeed they told the FBI exactly where his secret private safe was at and how to get into it. They told them the rooms that these documents were being stored in, what boxes they were in. So when the raid happened, they knew exactly where to go. So now we're looking at least probably the Espionage Act and obstruction of justice. Also, the fact that the FBI had to do a raid of this nature showed that they had information of what's called an exigent circumstance. That's your word of the week, exigent circumstance, meaning that we do not act right now. Something's about to happen soon, and that's what justifies us going in this nature and raiding instead of filing more subpoenas, going back to court, this, that, and the other. Taking that along with the nature of the confidential informants they have, this is where the classified documents come in. I know there were some questions from conservatives earlier in the week where they said, well, I thought you said classification didn't matter. Classification doesn't matter for the Espionage Act. These other crimes that he committed, the classification matters. And so more than likely, they had evidence and information coming from confidential sources inside of the White House, or inside of Mar-a-Lago, that they were going to try to either give away, leverage, or sell some of this documentation. And that's why they had to raid when they did. And that's where the federal statutes that deal with handling of classified information, that's where those come in. And that's where the president started to get in front of the story by saying, hey, I declassified everything. I just waved the wand and I said everything was declassified, which is not how declassification works. If that was the case, then President Trump could walk upstairs in the White House when he was still in office, declare the nuclear codes to be declassified, and then just sell them to the Russians, and then be on a plane by the end of the night. That's why it doesn't work that way. You can't just wave a wand and say it's declassified. Also, we had the student loan reform from Joe Biden that happened this week. And of course, we saw the much predicted conservative outrage over the issue. Oh my God. I can't believe you gave people $10,000. I just got $2 trillion in tax cuts. But if you give poor people $10,000, how will we keep them poor? That's really their argument. They have this idea that somebody walking around with $160,000, $200,000 in student loans, giving them $10,000 off of that, which ain't even handling the interest on those loans, that's some kind of big government socialist giveaway. You're taking money from truck drivers to give it to millionaires and billionaires. No, that's what Republicans do. What you're doing is for the people who are at the very bottom of the economy, who got sucked into this American dream, which is really an American nightmare, that you needed to get a college degree in order to advance. I mean, that's what they told us in the 80s. That's what they told us in the 90s. The people who got caught up in that BS often did not graduate and still had $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 in student loans that it can't pay off. Like, it's one thing to make minimum wage. It's another thing to make minimum wage and have $30,000 in student loans from a degree you didn't finish. So it's providing a small amount of relief to people like that, folks who are making $50,000, $60,000 a year. School teachers are out here making that amount of money, still paying back student loans. Social workers, the public defenders, DAs start with that kind of salary, still trying to pay these things back. law enforcement, people in the military, firefighters, making that kind of money and still loans to pay back. So it's literally the least that he could do, the president. And even that has sent conservatives into a fury. Oh my God, what is we going to do? One of the Republican congressmen even said, well, how are we going to recruit people from the army and we can't hold college tuition over their head? Letting you know that, look, we have been sending young, poor people off to die for generations to make money for oil companies. And then the only way we can get them to do so is by lying to them saying they'll get free college. You're not supposed to say that part out loud. You got to keep the lie going. And so then the other story this week that I felt like we needed to hop on is one that most of the mainstream media isn't talking about, but is by far the most important story, which is the Ukraine war. So the Ukraine war has entered a new phase. They've been in a stalemate for over a month now. We're 6 months into this war. And they're at a stalemate. There hasn't been much progress either in the Donbass region or in the south. There's been strikes in Crimea by Ukrainians, what they believe to be special forces. But there's a nuclear power plant in a town called Zaporizhia. And in Zaporizhia, that is the biggest nuclear power plant in all of Europe. It puts Chernobyl to shame. Chernobyl is up in the north of the country, and that's being occupied by the Russians also. But Ukraine has continued bombing Zaporizhia for the entire time that the Russians have been in control of it. And so earlier this week, because of the shelling by the Ukrainians on the nuclear power plant in Zaporizhia, we saw the power plant lose power for 24 hours, and it had to revert to its diesel backup generators. Now, you may be saying to yourself, well, why does that matter? Who cares if it went offline, they lost power for 24 hours? Well, the way the nuclear power plants work is that the liquid that they keep the spent rods in has to be continuously cooled in order to keep the plant operating properly. Think about Fukushima. When the tsunami hit, they were unable to cool the spent nuclear rods. And so when you're not able to cool them, you end up what's called a nuclear meltdown. That's what 3 Mile Island was. That's what Chernobyl was. So imagine 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl, and Fukushima all in one. That's Zaporizhia. That is what we're looking at. Not to mention that the nuclear power plant is located directly on one of the largest rivers in Ukraine, which flows down to Kherson and directly into the Black Sea and then into the Mediterranean. So if you had a nuclear meltdown at this power plant, you will be looking at the depopulation of much of Eastern Europe and North Africa. You'll be looking at fallout hitting most of the Mediterranean and Middle East. You'll be looking at a humanitarian and nuclear disaster never seen in the history of the world since the atomic bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki 78 years ago. That is what we are looking at. That is what is going to happen if nobody steps in to stop this fighting around the Zaporizhia nuclear plant. And American media is running around here, oh my God, you think they stole them boxes from Trump's house? Ooh, Hunter Biden's laptop. Nuclear disaster almost happened like Wednesday. If you don't think that would have made its way over here, you don't understand what nuclear war is. Talk to some of the older folks who remember those nuclear war drills during the Cold War. They got you hiding under your desk like that's going to stop an atomic bomb. Go out in the hallway and put your head between your knees and your arms above your heads in case there's some debris that falls on you from a nuclear strike. Nah, put your head between your legs and kiss your ass goodbye because you're about to die. That's what they didn't tell you. And we're on the verge of that right now in the largest nuclear power plant in all of Europe. And American media sees no reason at all to report on this. We're going to talk more about this after the break. Call in 404-892-2703. Get you involved in the conversation. News and Talk 1380 WAOK.